Hello, and welcome to our roundup of the European Parliament's plenary session here in Brussels. Now, of course, the EU is going through some tough times at the moment, but there's also some good news around. MEPs have approved Croatia's bid to become a full member of the European Union, 20 years after the country gained independence. Croatia has overcome the final hurdle in the way of its accession to the European Union. The Parliament's consent, which is required by EU law, clears the way for Croatia to sign the accession treaty in Warsaw next week. The accession date will be the 1st of July 2013, when Croatia will become the 28th member state of the Union. Croatia's triumph is the culmination of a lengthy process of negotiation, and it represents another important step in the EU's efforts to absorb the countries of the Western Balkan region. The path towards this moment has not always been easy. Croatia has had to take tough action to root out corruption and promote judicial reform in order to meet EU standards. Bernd Posselt, a German MEP who served as our group's shadow rapporteur on Croatia's accession, told the Parliament that Croatia fully deserved to become a member of the EU.
This country has been blocked in a way that was totally unacceptable, even artificial. And yet even the natural process of accession was difficult enough, because Croatia had to adhere to more stringent criteria than any other candidate country ever had to comply with. Croatia has overcome those obstacles with flying colors, so I am already looking forward to the day when observers from Croatia in the European Parliament will help give the European Union a new dynamic.
Croatia's accession is expected to give fresh momentum to efforts by other countries in the Western Balkans to join the EU. Now, Mario Draghi, the new president of the European Central Bank, could hardly have picked a worse time to take on the job. The ECB's current and future role in resolving the sovereign debt crisis is at the heart of the debate about how Europe should best respond to the difficulties it faces. Mr. Draghi, who was previously governor of the Bank of Italy, participated in a debate on the ECB's annual report for 2010. And although the debate was supposed to focus on the past, attention inevitably turned to the future. Europe's political leaders all agree on the need for urgent action to tackle the debt crisis, but there are differences of opinion about the extent of the ECB's involvement in reassuring the markets. Should the ECB become a lender of last resort, buying unlimited quantities of debt from stricken Eurozone economies? Some politicians say yes, others worry that would lead to inflation. In his remarks, Mr. Draghi struck an upbeat note but gave little away about policy developments.
Fundamental questions are being raised and they call for an answer. At the heart of these questions are not only the credibility of government's policies and the actual delivery of the promised reforms, but also the overall design of our common fiscal governance. I am confident that the new surveillance framework will restore confidence over time. I'm also quite sure that countries overall are on the right track. But a credible signal is needed to give ultimate assurance over the short term.
With a European Council summit of EU heads of state and government just a week away, members of Parliament set out their views about the action member states should take to reassure both markets and citizens that the EU has a credible response to the crisis. There's been much discussion about the need for changes in the EU treaties in order to create a strong and permanent structure of economic governance to prevent any repeat of the current problems. But EPP Group Vice Chairman Paolo Rangel said this debate was distracting the EU from the urgent need to create growth and jobs.
As regards the situation in the European Union, we can say that the lights have changed from orange to red. The OECD predicts a recession in Europe next year. Sovereign debt is finding fewer buyers. The unemployment rate is reaching a level that is making our citizens, and particularly our young people, feel desperate. Faced with these challenges, the European Union must both react and decide on its governance. Lately, there has been much talk about a reform of the treaties, but as far as I'm concerned, this is not a crisis of treaties. It's a crisis of debt.
Most EU member states have imposed tough spending cuts at home, so they're reluctant to see a substantial increase in spending by the EU. However, many MEPs believe that more Europe is the answer to the economic gloom, which means more spending. This time last year, the EU's annual budget was the subject of fierce debate between the Council and the Parliament. At one stage, it looked as though an agreement would not be reached, but in the end, the Parliament had to settle for less money than it wanted. This week, MEPs voted on the EU's annual budget for 2012, which foresees an increase of 2%, much less than the Parliament and the Commission wanted. But with the debt crisis overshadowing the EU, there was little appetite this year for a prolonged battle of wills. Despite the financial constraints facing the EU, development aid is one of the cornerstones of the EU's external relations policy. How that money gets spent and how it gets prioritised was the subject of a debate in this week's plenary session. There's broad agreement across the EU institutions about the importance of development aid. Indeed, the EU is the world's most generous aid donor. However, there have been disagreements in the past about how priorities are set and the roles of the respective EU institutions. The debate in this week's session focused on a series of funding mechanisms set up by the EU to channel resources to developing countries. Gay Mitchell, an EPP Group member from Ireland, was the Parliament's rapporteur on the so-called Development Cooperation Instrument, or DCI. He expressed dismay that the Council had proved reluctant to consider the Parliament as an equal legislative partner in the review of this instrument, as should be the case under the Lisbon Treaty. And he criticised the Commission for failing to act as an honest broker between the Council and the Parliament in sorting out the disagreement.
This is the Parliament of Europe. We have not been shown the full respect we are entitled to by the Commission in this regard, and it's not the first time. It took me 2.5 years to negotiate the DCI because of the same approach and attitude by the Commission. And I say this, Mr. Vice President, if the Commission of its own volition does not return to the spirit and the principles of the treaties, then the President of Parliament must call them to account.
And before Christmas, Gay Mitchell will be talking to us more about this issue in our next edition of People First. Well, that's all from EPP Report for this week. We'll be back in a couple of weeks in Strasbourg for the final plenary session of the year. Until then, you can find out more about our activities on our website, eppgroup.eu. Thanks for watching, and see you again soon.